Lady Rose stared out the crystalline windows of her family's orbital palace, watching the swirling purple storms of her homeworld below. Another day, another rejection. The latest suitor, a being of pure energy from the bright realms, had just departed in what could only be described as a huff, if pure energy beings could huff. My lady, her attendant Belle, approached carefully. Your father wishes to speak with you about today's incident. Rose turned away from the window, her iridescent skin catching the light of the nearby star. At 7 feet tall, she towered over most species in the Confederation, but her slender build and graceful movements made her appear less intimidating than her height suggested. Let me guess, she said. He's disappointed again. The grand chamber doors slid open, revealing High Lord Marcus, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him. His expression was stern, the bioluminescent patterns on his face pulsing with barely contained frustration. Daughter, he began, that was the 4th suitor this cycle. The Bright Realm representative was highly regarded. His energy matrix was perfectly compatible with our biological structure. Rose suppressed the urge to roll all 3 of her eyes. Father, he spent the entire meeting talking about how he could power our entire sector single-handedly. He didn't ask me a single question about myself. That's because he already knew everything about you. He studied your complete biological and psychological profile before arriving. That's exactly the problem. Rose's skin flashed with patterns of annoyance. They all treat me like a specimen to be analyzed, like a prize to be won through careful calculation. Belle quietly slipped away as father and daughter faced each other. The tension in the room was thick enough to be visible to the energy-sensitive creatures that maintained the palace's systems. You have a duty to our family, to the Confederation, Marcus reminded her. Our position requires certain sacrifices. The alliance possibilities with the Bright Realm would strengthen our hold on the outer sectors. Yes, I know. Rose moved to a hovering chair and sat down gracefully. But father, these suitors, they're all the same. They come here with their achievements, their power, their technological advancements. But none of them see me as anything more than a strategic addition to their assets. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Perhaps if you gave them more time to list their accomplishments, to explain how their civilizations are superior to others. Rose shook her head. The last one before today, the quantum collective being, spent 3 hours explaining how they had mastered 11 dimensions. They didn't even notice when I left the room for 20 minutes. A soft chime interrupted their conversation. Belle reappeared, looking somewhat nervous. My lord, my lady, the council requests an immediate audience. There's a situation developing in the outer territories. Marcus straightened his robes. We'll continue this discussion later. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Rose, please remember, our position comes with responsibilities. The stability of entire star systems can depend on the alliances we forge. After he left, Rose returned to her window. Below, the storms continued their endless dance across the planet's surface. She pressed her forehead against the cool crystal, closing her eyes. My lady, Belle spoke softly. Perhaps the next one will be different. Rose laughed, but there was no joy in it. They're never different, Belle. They're all so perfect, so advanced, so absolutely certain of their own superiority. She opened her eyes, watching as a transport ship departed the orbital dock, its wake disturbing the upper atmosphere. I'm tired of perfect. I'm tired of advanced. Just once, I'd like to meet someone who sees the universe with wonder instead of ownership. Little did she know, far away on a small blue planet called Earth, events were unfolding that would change everything she thought she knew about what made a species truly advanced. The council chamber hummed with tense energy as reports from Earth filled the massive holographic displays. Images of human spacecraft, primitive by Confederation standards, but advancing at an alarming rate, floated in the air. They've achieved faster than light travel, announced Council Member Drift, their crystalline form reflecting the light of the displays. Less than a decade after discovering antimatter manipulation, This breaks all known patterns of technological progression. Lady Rose sat beside her father in their family's designated section. Unlike the other council members who showed various signs of distress, she found herself fascinated by the images of Earth's ships. They weren't elegant like Confederation vessels. They were sturdy, practical, almost crude in their design. But they worked. "The humans have no right to advance this quickly," declared another council member, their tentacles waving in agitation. "They haven't even unified their planet properly. They still have wars." High Lord Marcus raised his hand for attention. When he spoke, the chamber fell silent. "Whether they have the right or not is irrelevant. They have achieved it. The question now is how we respond." Rose studied the latest footage. A human ship had successfully defended itself against a pirate attack in the outer sectors. The pirates, using superior technology, had expected an easy victory. Instead, the humans had won through what appeared to be a combination of unconventional tactics and sheer stubbornness. "We should contain them," suggested one of the energy beings. "Create a quarantine zone around their solar system." "They've already established colonies in neighboring systems," Drift countered. "And their ships, they're not like anything we've seen. They're redundant, overbuilt. They can take damage that would destroy our more advanced vessels and keep functioning." Rose leaned forward as new footage appeared. A human diplomatic party was requesting a meeting with the Confederation. The leader of the group, a man identified as Jack, stood out from his colleagues. While they seemed awed by the Grand Council chamber in the recording, he was studying everything with keen, analytical eyes. "They're requesting full diplomatic recognition," Marcus announced, "and trade agreements." The chamber erupted in protest. Rose watched as her father waited patiently for the noise to die down. She knew that look on his face. He had already made a decision. "My family will handle the diplomatic negotiations," he declared finally. "We have the most experience in dealing with emerging civilizations." "But they're barely civilized," protested someone. "Look at their ships. They still use physical controls instead of neural interfaces." Rose couldn't help herself. "And yet those ships defeated the pirates that have been plaguing our outer sectors for years." All eyes turned to her. She rarely spoke in council meetings, but something about this situation compelled her to continue. "We've been trying to stop those pirates with our most advanced ships, our most sophisticated weapons. The humans did it with inferior technology and superior strategy. Maybe that's worth studying rather than dismissing." Her father gave her an approving nod. "My daughter makes a valid point. The humans are different, yes, but different doesn't necessarily mean inferior." The meeting continued for hours, but the decision was made. The House of Marcus would handle Earth's diplomatic integration into the wider galactic community. As they left the chamber, Rose's father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll be personally responsible for the human diplomatic team," he told her. "Consider it practice for your future duties." Rose looked at him suspiciously. "This isn't another attempt to find me a suitable match, is it?" Marcus laughed. "From humans, my dear, I may be desperate for you to find a partner, but I'm not that desperate." As they walked away, Rose found herself reviewing the footage of the human diplomatic team again, particularly their leader. There was something different about him, about all of them really. They looked at the wonders of the Confederation not with envy or arrogance, but with genuine curiosity. For the first time in a long while, she found herself looking forward to a diplomatic meeting. These humans might be primitive by Confederation standards, but they were certainly not boring. The diplomatic reception hall gleamed with its usual splendor, floating crystal lights casting rainbow patterns across the gathered dignitaries. Lady Rose stood at her designated position, wearing her formal attire that shifted colors with her movements. She had witnessed countless first meetings in this hall, but something felt different today. The human delegation entered, and Rose immediately noticed they moved differently than other species. Where most visitors tried to match the Confederation's formal grace, the humans walked with purpose. Their leader, Jack, wore what they called a suit Simple black and white clothing that should have looked plain among the spectacular garments around him, but somehow didn't. Lady Rose. Jack bowed slightly. Not too deep, not too shallow. Perfect diplomatic protocol. But something in his eyes suggested he found the whole thing slightly amusing. "Thank you for hosting us. Welcome to the Confederation's Central Hub," she replied, expecting him to launch into the usual formal pleasantries. Instead, he looked around the vast hall and said, "You know, I've seen pictures of this place, but they don't do it justice. How do you keep those crystals floating? The energy requirement must be enormous." Rose blinked in surprise. Most visitors pretended to already know everything about Confederation technology. Actually, they're sustained by a fascinating combination of gravitational fields and... She caught herself. "I apologize. You're probably more interested in discussing the trade agreements." "Why apologize?" Jack smiled. "The technical details are interesting. Besides, understanding each other's technology is pretty important for trade, isn't it?" As they walked through the hall, Rose found herself explaining more about the hub's systems. Jack asked intelligent questions, not to show off his knowledge, but out of genuine interest. When he didn't understand something, he said so directly instead of pretending. "So," he said during a pause in their discussion, "I hear you're something of a legend among diplomatic circles. The unattainable Lady Rose, rejecting suitors from the most advanced civilizations in known space." Rose tensed, expecting another attempt at courtship. "Is that relevant to our negotiations?" "Not at all," Jack laughed. "Just making conversation. Besides, from what I've heard, they all sound like terrible matches. All technology and no personality. That's no way to live." She stared at him, caught off guard by his candor. "You're not like most diplomats I've met." "I'll take that as a compliment. Most diplomats I've met are too busy trying to impress everyone to actually get anything done." He stopped at a window overlooking the hub's central garden. "Now that's beautiful. Reminds me of the botanical gardens back on Earth, though ours don't flow upward like that." Their conversation was interrupted by Belle, rushing forward with obvious concern. "My lady, there's a priority message from the outer sectors. Another pirate attack." Rose started to excuse herself, but Jack's expression had changed from casual to focused. "Pirates. The same ones that have been hitting the trade routes." "Yes," Rose replied, surprised by his interest. "Our forces are handling it. Mind if I observe? We've had some experience with these raiders. Might be able to offer some insights." Instead of dismissing him or claiming humans couldn't help, Rose found herself leading Jack to the tactical center. As they walked, she realized she'd spent the last hour having the most normal conversation she'd had in years, with a human, of all people. In the tactical center, displays showed the developing situation. Jack studied them intently, asking practical questions about the pirates' tactics and the Confederation's response. There was no boasting about human achievements, no criticism of Confederation methods, just focused problem-solving. Rose watched him work, noticed how the Confederation tactical officers gradually began asking his opinion, sharing information freely. He built rapport not through diplomatic niceties, but through competence and straightforward communication. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly as they watched the situation unfold. Jack glanced at her with that slight smile. "Neither are you, your ladyship. Neither are you." For the first time in her diplomatic career, Rose found herself hoping a meeting would run long. The emergency alarms echoed through the central hub, their haunting tones signaling a level of crisis not seen in generations. Lady Rose rushed into the council chamber, her skin patterns showing clear distress. The normally orderly room was in chaos, with representatives from all major species talking over each other. The void cluster is expanding. Drift's crystalline form vibrated with anxiety. 3 solar systems have already been consumed. On the main display, a massive dark region of space pulsed and grew, swallowing stars and planets in its path. The Confederation's most advanced ships hovered at its edges, their weapons and technology seemingly useless against the phenomenon. Jack stood quietly in the corner where the human delegation had been granted observer status. While others panicked, he studied the tactical displays with intense focus. "Our containment fields are failing," announced a senior scientist, their tentacles twisting in distress. "The quantum barriers can't hold against the void's expansion." Rose noticed Jack making notes on what looked like actual paper, a habit that had initially amused her, but now seemed strangely reassuring in its simplicity. She moved closer to him, away from the growing argument among council members. "You're very calm for someone watching multiple solar systems disappear," she said quietly. "Panicking never solved anything," he replied, still writing. "Besides, I think I see a pattern here that everyone's too worried to notice." Before Rose could ask what he meant, her father called for order. The chamber gradually fell silent, though the fear remained palpable. "Our best minds have failed to stop the void cluster," Marcus announced. "If we cannot contain it, the destruction will reach the core worlds within months." Jack cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him, many showing disdain that a human would dare interrupt. "Permission to speak." Marcus nodded, ignoring the murmurs of protest from some council members. "You're all trying to stop this thing with direct force," Jack said, walking to the central display. "But look at the spread pattern. It's not random." He pointed to several points where the void seemed to bulge. "It's following energy lines, feeding off your attempts to contain it. The more power you throw at it, the stronger it gets." "And what would humans know of such phenomena?" demanded one of the energy beings. "Your species barely understands basic space-time manipulation." "We know enough about fighting losing battles," Jack replied calmly. "And we know that sometimes the best way to win is to stop fighting altogether." Rose felt her breath catch as she suddenly understood. "You're suggesting we let it grow." "Not exactly." Jack manipulated the display, highlighting specific points around the void cluster. "I'm suggesting we give it exactly what it wants, but on our terms. Create controlled energy feeds here, here, and here. Guide its growth instead of trying to stop it." "That's insane." Someone shouted. "We'd be feeding the very thing destroying us." Sometimes, Rose found herself saying, the insane solution is the right one. She moved to stand beside Jack, studying his notes, like using primitive ships to defeat advanced pirates. Jack smiled at her. "Exactly. Sometimes being less advanced gives you a different perspective." The council erupted in argument again, but Rose barely heard them. She was too busy watching Jack explain his plan to her father, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. There was no arrogance in his presentation, no certainty that he was right, just a clear, practical approach to solving a problem that all their advanced technology couldn't handle. "It's risky," Marcus said finally, "but it might be our only option." As the council began organizing the implementation of Jack's plan, Rose touched his arm. "Thank you for speaking up. Many would have stayed quiet, knowing how the council views humans." "That's the problem with being too advanced," Jack replied. "You start thinking there's only one right way to do things." He looked at her directly. "Sometimes the best solutions come from where you least expect them." Rose felt her skin patterns shift to colors she hadn't displayed in years. For the first time, she understood why simple might be better than perfect. "My lady, your father will not approve of this," Belle whispered as Rose adjusted her appearance modifier to look more human-sized. The device was typically used for diplomatic meetings with smaller species, not for unauthorized trips to the human diplomatic quarters. "Then let's make sure he doesn't find out," Rose replied, checking her reflection. At just under 6 feet tall now, she would still be tall for a human, but not conspicuously so. Besides, Jack invited me to experience what he called movie night. It's a cultural exchange. Belle sighed, knowing there was no stopping her mistress when she had that tone. "At least let me accompany you. And draw more attention." "No, I'll be fine." Rose headed for the private transport tube. "Cover for me if anyone asks." The human diplomatic section of the hub was noticeably different from the rest. Where Confederation architecture favored sweeping curves and floating structures, the humans had requested simple, solid designs. They'd even installed manual doors with handles alongside the automatic ones. Jack was waiting at the entrance, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You came, and you used a size modifier. Good thinking." "I was curious about this movie concept," Rose said, following him inside. "We have entertainment, of course, but from what you've described, this is different." The room inside was arranged informally, with comfortable seating focused on a large screen. Several other humans were present, all dressed casually. Rose noticed they treated Jack with friendly respect rather than the rigid formality she was used to. "Everyone, this is Rose," Jack announced. "Rose, meet the team. We're watching an old classic tonight, The Princess Bride." As the movie played, Rose found herself fascinated not just by the story, but by the humans' reactions. They laughed together, quoted lines they all seemed to know, and explained cultural references she didn't understand. It was so different from the formal entertainment events she was used to. "I don't understand," she whispered to Jack during one scene. "If this Wesley has superior intellect, why doesn't he simply state his credentials to prove his worth to Buttercup?" Jack chuckled. "That's not how love works, at least not for humans. It's about connection, not qualifications." After the movie, they walked through the hub's night cycle gardens. Rose had dropped her size modification, comfortable being herself around Jack. "Your culture is fascinating," she said. "You value stories about people overcoming superior forces through wit and determination." "We've had a lot of practice at being the underdog," Jack replied. "Seems to be our natural state." A group of Confederation nobles passed by, their shocked expressions at seeing Lady Rose with a human clearly visible. She found she didn't care. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I have official duties tomorrow." "We're having a barbecue next week," Jack said. "It's another human tradition. You should come." "What's a barbecue?" "Food cooked over actual fire. Probably completely primitive by your standards." Rose smiled. "I'll be there." Back in her quarters, she found her father waiting. His expression was severe, his skin patterns showing concern. "You were seen with the human diplomat," he said, "in an unofficial capacity." "We were discussing cultural differences," Rose replied. "It's important for diplomatic relations." "There are rumors, daughter. Rumors that you're spending too much time with him." "Since when is learning about another species a problem?" She met his gaze steadily. "Unless you're worried about something else." Marcus sighed. "Just be careful. Remember who you are. Remember your position." After he left, Rose stood at her window, looking out at the stars. For the first time in her life, her position felt like a cage rather than a privilege. Somewhere in the human quarter, people were laughing, sharing stories, being real with each other. She made her decision. Next week, she would learn what a barbecue was, rumors or no rumors. The council meeting erupted into chaos when Ambassador Glow materialized in the center of the chamber, his energy form blazing with barely contained fury. "We demand Lady Rose's hand in marriage. The treaty has already been signed by the High Lords." Rose, seated in her usual place, felt her skin patterns flash with shock and anger. "What treaty? I never agreed to this." Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. The other council members shifted uncomfortably, except for Jack, who had gone very still in his observer's position. "The arrangement has been made," Ambassador Glow announced. "You will join with our collective consciousness within 3 cycles. This will prevent war between our realms." "War?" Rose stood, her full height impressive even among the council members. "Are you threatening the Confederation?" "We merely state facts. The Void Cluster's containment requires our continued cooperation. Without this union, we cannot guarantee our support will continue." Rose felt sick. They were using the crisis to force her hand. Looking around the chamber, she saw resignation on most faces. They would sacrifice her for stability. "This is wrong." Jack's voice cut through the tension. He stood, ignoring protocol completely. "You can't force someone into marriage as a political tool." Silence. Human. Ambassador Glow flared brighter. "This is beyond your primitive understanding of alliances." Rose watched as security drones began surrounding Jack. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Without a word, she walked to stand beside him. "I reject this arrangement," she announced clearly. "You have no choice," her father finally spoke. "The stability of the Confederation." "There's always a choice," Jack interrupted. He touched a small device on his wrist. "Rose, do you trust me?" She looked at him, at this human who had shown her more respect and genuine care than any advanced being ever had. "Yes." "Then run." The lights in the chamber suddenly went dark. Rose felt Jack's hand grab hers as they bolted for the exit. Behind them, she heard the ambassador's enraged howl and her father shouting orders. They raced through the hub's corridors, Jack seemingly knowing exactly where to go. "Human ships have backup systems for everything," he explained as they ran, "including manual overrides for power systems. Your security relies too much on automation." They reached the diplomatic docking bay just as alarms began blaring throughout the hub. A small human shuttle waited, engines already running. "You planned for this?" Rose asked as they climbed aboard. "Let's just say I had a feeling something like this might happen." Jack's hands flew over the controls. "I've seen too many diplomatic arrangements in my career." The shuttle burst from the bay just as energy beams from the ambassador's forces reached for them. Jack flew with skill that belied the craft's supposedly primitive design, weaving through the hub's defense grid. "They're sealing the spacing lanes," Rose warned, watching the tactical display. "Good thing we're not using the lanes then." Jack grinned and drove the shuttle straight toward a maintenance corridor. "That's barely wide enough for repair drones." "Trust me." The shuttle scraped through the corridor, emerging on the other side of the hub's main defenses. Ahead, a human cruiser decloaked, another technology the Confederation had dismissed as too primitive to be effective. As they docked with the cruiser, Rose looked back at the hub, her home, her duty, her prison. "I can't go back now." "You don't have to." Jack's voice was gentle. "But I need to know, did you come because you needed an escape or because you wanted to?" Rose turned to him, letting her skin patterns show her true feelings for the first time. "I came because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as more than my physician. Someone cared about what I wanted, not what I could provide." The cruiser jumped to FTL speed as hub pursuit ships finally organized themselves. Rose felt no regret, only a growing excitement about what lay ahead. "So," Jack said with a smile, ready to really learn about human culture. No diplomatic filters this time. Rose laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Teach me everything." 3 months after what the Confederation media called the Great Betrayal, Lady Rose stood before the council again. This time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Jack, and behind them were the commanders of Earth's combined fleet. "The Void Cluster has been fully contained," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, "thanks to the combined efforts of human ingenuity and Confederation technology." Her father, looking older than she remembered, leaned forward. "And you expect this to excuse your actions? The shame you brought to our family?" "No," Rose replied calmly. "I expect it to prove a point. The humans didn't just help contain the Void Cluster. They improved on the original plan. Their primitive understanding of energy dynamics led to solutions our advanced civilization couldn't see." Jack stepped forward, presenting data crystals to the council. "The containment fields are stable. We've even found ways to harvest energy from the cluster safely. All of this technology is being offered freely to the Confederation." Ambassador Glow, who had been quietly seething, flared brightly. "This changes nothing. The treaty." "The treaty," Rose interrupted, "was signed under duress and threat of war. Shall we discuss that before the full council?" The energy being dimmed considerably. My daughter, Marcus spoke softly, you ran away with a human. Do you understand what that means for our standing? I understand perfectly. Rose's skin patterns shifted to show determination mixed with compassion. I chose love over politics. I chose substance over appearance. And in doing so, I found something all our advanced civilization had forgotten. The joy of discovery, of seeing the universe with wonder instead of assumption. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the contained void cluster. Look what we accomplished together. Not through political marriages or forced alliances, but through genuine cooperation and respect. Jack touched her hand gently. The Earth Alliance offers open diplomatic relations with the Confederation, equal partners, learning from each other's strengths. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Rose watched as her father studied the data crystals, saw the moment he began to understand. The human methods, he said finally, they're unorthodox, primitive by our standards. But they work. He looked at his daughter. Perhaps we have become too set in our ways. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Rose said. I'm offering a new beginning. Humans have shown me that being advanced doesn't always mean being right. Sometimes, the simplest solution is the best one. Like falling in love? Her father asked, a hint of his old warmth returning. Exactly. Rose smiled. The most primitive and most advanced thing any species can do. The council voted that day to accept the Earth Alliance's offer. As the members filed out, Marcus approached his daughter and her human partner. You were right, he told Rose. About everything. We had forgotten how to look at the universe with wonder. He turned to Jack. Take care of her. Actually, Jack grinned. She takes care of me most of the time. Those size modification devices come in really handy. Later, on their ship headed back to Earth, Rose watched the stars streak by. Do you think they'll really change? Learn to see beyond their assumptions. They have you to teach them, Jack replied. The princess who chose a primitive human over all the advanced beings in the galaxy. Not primitive, she corrected him. Just different, and exactly what I needed. As their ship carried them toward Earth, where their wedding would combine human traditions with Confederation customs, Rose thought about her journey. She had been raised to believe that advancement meant perfection, that technology equaled worth. Instead, she had found perfection in imperfection, worth in simplicity, and love in the most unexpected place. The stars streaked past, each one a reminder that the universe was full of wonders yet to be discovered, especially when you looked at them with new eyes. She had finally found someone worthy of her heart, not because he was the most advanced, but because he was simply, perfectly human.